naming versus blaming. Oh, this is such a big deal within just our hearts as we're walking through trauma, as we're walking through our wounds with our family of origin, as we're walking through experiences that we've had of abuse. And so there's a really big difference between naming versus blaming. And blaming something is when somebody is just a victim and they're all about releasing self-justice, which is filled with punishment, filled with anger and hatred and venom, all towards the person who hurt you. Blaming does not lead to healing. Blaming leads to just a life of resentment, a life of fear, a life of punishment, a life filled with hatred, which ultimately is the attitude of bitterness, which when that creeps in your soul, bitterness and unforgiveness destroy lives. But naming, on the other hand, is way different. It actually comes from an attitude that wants to release forgiveness, but it also sees the injustice. It sees the dishonor. It sees the corruption and horror that happened to you as an individual. And when we're able to name things and call them what they were, that actually has the opportunity for acceptance and healing and the true place of integration. When we push them away because we're afraid to look at the reality of our story, man, that leads to just being stuck. That's a disassociated experience from our story where we're not able to be honest because we're afraid that honesty doesn't equal forgiveness. And that concept is so silly. And this is why David is so helpful in the Psalms. He tells the truth all the time. He says it just like it is. He was a man after God's own heart that knew how to forgive. He knew also how to repent. And so in that way, us being honest about what happened to you in your story is one of the greatest places of freedom. It's one of the greatest places of joy when we can see our whole story, when we can see all the different parts and we're able to name the things that happened to us. And a lot of times the question gets asked to me by leaders, isn't that dishonor? Isn't that going to be me dishonoring my father and mother? It's not dishonoring to name to the Lord. It's a beautiful process to name something to another. This is why the scriptures talk about confessing sin one to another that you might be healed. And sin there is separation. When we're able to say and get things out of us that, hey, this happened when I was younger. My father treated me like this. My mother did this. When we're able to do that, and it's not blaming them, but it's naming the reality of what happens, oh, there's so much freedom. When somebody releases the grace nutrient of containment, or they come with acceptance or validation, they validate how painful that was to us as a child, oh, that releases so much grace, which releases healing to our hearts. And it actually restores our soul. This is one of the restorations of our soul, is when we're able to name things and not keep things in the closet or in the dark or buried, because that just creates ultimately a different level of bitterness. It's because we get bitter at ourselves because we don't know how to tell the truth. And I get around so many people who don't know how to tell the truth of their story because they're afraid to dishonor somebody. And again, in that first heart is pure because we want to honor our parents. We want to honor all people. But when we don't give ourselves the ability to see what happened, oh man, you guys, we just stay so stuck. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to live stuck. I want to grow from glory to glory, from faith to faith, from healing to healing. And so find someone that you trust that's not going to house their own bitterness of resentment, someone like a pastor or therapist or counselor or coach that's able to handle our story. It's able to bring containment and grace to your story. And this is one of the ways we mourn. And remember, mourning leads to comfort and leads to an internal resilience and strength and a joy-filled life.